What is up, everybody on YouTube? So I'm doing this voiceover for this league I ran last night, where I just kind of like took Shadow and Zoo, jammed them together. We did something similar a few months ago, where we took Zoo, like the Zoo actual Zoo shell, and just replaced like Wild Nicoddles with Shadow or something, and that was it. This one is a little more like Shadow, like Jun Splash Blue Shadow, except for replacing some of the pieces of interaction with like Territorial Kavu and a couple like battle rages and street rates and stuff with ley line bindings. And we're just getting a little bit crazy and out there. I have to preface the video by saying this is not a like hashed out list. This isn't went down into the study, ran the numbers. This is what we came up with. Not that at all. This is just taking two archetypes and bashing their heads together and seeing what happens. So first off, we got the shadow side. What do we take from the shadow decks? We took Mishra's Bauble. We took Death Shadow itself, Thoughtseize, Lightning Bolt, Ragavan, Unholy Heat, Teamer Battle Rage, Tarmogoyf. From the Zoo side, we took the four Stubborn Denials, which feels weird saying we took the Stubborn Denials from Zoo instead of Shadow, but Shadow decks currently aren't running Stubborn Denial. A lot of the Zoo decks are, so took it from Zoo. We took the four Kavu. We took two Dromoka's Command, two Teferi Time Raveler, three Leyline Bindings, and this is what we got. Like, there is not a lot of thought going into this list. It was just, I want to have fun and do something. This is what we're going with. Mana base, same way. Not hashed out. Numbers have not been ran. We've not put it through various tests and studies. This was just, oh, let me take the Grixis Shadow mana base, add a couple lands like Overgrown Tomb and Breeding Pool to help out with the green, and we want to get Kavu online aggressively. What can we take from Zoo to make that happen? And we took the Mardu Triumph, the Savai Triumph, and the Zagoth Triumph, the Sultai Triumph. And like the Sultai Triumph plus Sacred Foundry gets you all five colors, as well as allowing you to cast Kavu, Dromoka's Command, get blue white for Teferi, Geist, and the Breeding Pool and Mardu Triumph the exact same. Allows you to cast like your Kavu, Dromoka's Command, Teferi, all that stuff. So that's why we took those two triumphs. We'll wait until the end of the video to talk a little bit about feedback, what we thought of the list, what changes we'd make. In the sideboard, the shadow influence is things like the two Flusterstorm. I've seen a couple Zoo lists run them as well, but mostly shadow in my opinion. The Alpine Moons from Shadow, the Collector of the two Veil Summers from Zoo. The two natural states, I was looking for some sort of a disenchant effect. Couldn't find one that I liked that hit everything I wanted to hit for preferably the least amount of mana. I thought about Nature's Claim, but I really don't want to be like an aggressive, proactive deck and give my opponent a bunch of life. So Natural State gave me a pretty good balance of being able to hit like Urza's Saga, everything in Hammer Time except Cauldra, hits Blood Moon, hits Unlicensed Hearse, um, hits Aether Vial, but I don't think you're bringing it in against most Aether Vial decks. It just misses Leyline Binding as about the only like prominent one. Um, I guess you could say it misses Leyline of the Void and like Leyline of Sanctity, but you're usually not blowing those up anyway. Two Guys to St. Traff pulled from Zoo. These are like your beat sticks against the control matchups that they can't get off the board. Two Engineered Explosives and two Unlicensed Hearse, all from Shadow, and then Giganta is like a shared commodity between both decks. So just gets to kind of come along for the free ride. So this is the list we got. Let's go ahead and hop into the matches, and we'll see what you guys think, guys and gals. So this is match number one. So things we want to be looking out for as we go through the matches are like how often is the mana base awkward? Since, like I said, that's not tested. How often are we getting Kavu online, like getting our 5 colors? When I say online with Kavu, I mean like how often is it like a 4/4 or 5/5 reliably? Uh, how often are we having to like play awkwardly off curve to make some stuff happen? So match number 1, we win the die roll, reveal our Pokemon. Ah, skip straight through the mulligan there. So let's rewind slightly. So opening hand, 4 lands, Shadow. Hands are not really doing anything. We're like hoping this Mishra's Bauble draws into something. But Shadow's not online until turn 3. So maybe we get to like turn 3 Shadow plus Dromoka's command, but that's not the most exciting start to a match. So we're going to throw that back. Hand number 2. We're on the play of the Ragavan. It's like better than the first one. And it's a look at, am I okay with this or would I rather go to 5? And for the most part, I think I'm okay with kind of sticking with this. Like I've got the Ragavan on the play. If my opponent maybe tries to go to my turn and answer the Ragavan inside of combat, I get Stubborn Denial, which I can get off just like a Steam Vents here. And if I'm able to get my mana developed, maybe find a second land, then all of a sudden I get these Leyline Bindings unlocked. So it gives me a reasonable amount of draws to go to. Like any lands are good. Secondary threats are good. If Ragavan lives, that's excellent. But for the moment, I'm just going to throw back one of these Leyline Bindings. Like they're the farthest cards from being active with this hand, since I'm probably just getting a Steam Vents to have Ragavan and blue mana. Let's throw back the extra binding. Might actually swap the view slightly. Mainly because I don't want the I don't want this skipping around, which it tends to do when the view's wide. But let's see. Maybe we can get it to work. Expand a little bit, see what happens. Alright, so bobble them on their upkeep. We see a Yawgmoth. Doesn't really tell me a lot. Like I assume it's probably something like Yawgmoth with Yawgmoth, but it could be like elves, could be I don't know. Don't know a ton of decks that are playing Yawgmoth, Tron maybe. But Ignoble Hierarch means it's almost certainly Yawgmoth. So we get lucky and we're able to find more Leyline Bindings instead of lands. So hit you. Wall of Roots doesn't do anything for us. So I'm just going to leave them with that. And turn 2 Grist out of them is like worst case scenario for us. So it's essentially I either find a way to cast one of these Leyline Bindings here or I scoop. And Thoughtseize doesn't do it. So this hard Grist is going to hard block the Ragavan. We don't have the mana to cast our Leyline Bindings. We can't Stubborn Denial Grist on the stack because it's a creature. So we're just kind of dead in the water there. But that's fine. We got 2 more games. Sideboarding against Yawgmoth. Stubborn Denial's coming out. I basically don't want anything that's like targeting non-creature stuff because 80+% of their deck is creatures, especially when like Grist is a creature on the stack. Boarded out a single copy of Ragavan. It's a lot better on the play than the draw, but it's not great on either. But it's better than like Stubborn Denial. Board ends. Brought in the 2 unlicensed hearses. Brought in 1 copy of the engineered explosives. The other thing I brought in the 2 Geists. as a way to like attack into grist tokens, maybe clear grist off the board. And I believe that was it. So reveal Gigantha again. Much better hand than the first game. Got turn one Ragavan. We could go like turn one Blood Crypt Ragavan, turn two. If we get to hit, maybe we've got Dromoka's command available. If we don't get to hit, then maybe we set up Leyline Binding with like Savai Triome, and then Bloodsaint Mire can get like Overgrown Tomb. But either way, we at least get to like start off Ragavan. As long as our opponent doesn't have a Yawgmoth, we're okay. So they start off with a Dryad Arbor, which is pretty good for us because we're attacking into a Dryad Arbor. Like, if our opponent wants to block the Ragavan and set themselves back 2 turns, sure, let's do it. And if they don't block with the Dryad Arbor, then we get to set up a nifty little Dromoka's command to just fight it. Now we got a Ragavan that outsizes a Yawgmoth. They're back down to 1 land. We already know we can swing into any sort of mana dork. So here we're just working on setting up like a pretty big mana advantage. Couldn't play the Geist that turn, but we can absolutely get down their Birds of Paradise. Help power through a lot of these more expensive spells we've got. So Stringerroot Geist has Undying. I don't really want to trade a Ragavan with it, so let's just like get rid of it altogether. And then my favorite turn of this entire league is just, hey, let me Geist and double Shadow on turn 4. Opponent passes there, so I'm assuming they've got a Endurance to flash in. Which, if they flash it in, they kind of have to block the Geist. If they don't block the Geist, like if they block the Ragavan, they take 6, 7, 8, go to 3, and then the Geist is lethal with the attacker in the air next turn. So they probably have to block the Geist, take 7, 8, 9. And like I'm fine trading the Geist for what 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 points of damage when I can play the Kavu out too. But they just take it. I kind of assume they decided that they didn't have a winning line at that point, which is okay with me. That brings us to game number 3 here. Opening hand as we reveal Gigantha. A little bit of a slow opener. Like, we've got turn 2 of 5/5 Kavu. We can play Savai Triome into Breeding Pool. We've got Mishra's Bauble to kind of help find something. We've got Leyline Binding on turn 2 if we want it, into like Geist on 3. So my hope is that my opponent's got like a little bit slow start out of the gate, like maybe don't have a mana dork on 1. But more importantly, this Leyline Binding might get to snag either an Undying creature or it could snag a Grist, something like that. Now they do mulligan down to 5. Mulligan to 5, have the birds. We find a Ragavan. So here we can play out the Ragavan. If our opponent's got like a turn 2 Grist, then we can Leyline Binding it. Not this upcoming turn, but in a couple turns. If they don't have the Grist, if they have like an Eldritch Evolution, then that could be okay for me. Speak of the devil. I guess little cameras in the way here. So we bubble them, see the Eldritch Evolution. So now I'm thinking like, all right, they evolution away the birds, they get a grist, tick it up. Now I've got to probably let them make a couple tokens and Leyline Binding the grist like next turn. But instead they just play Scavenging Ooze and no land drop. So that means I am 100% attacking into this Scavenging Ooze. Like I'm willing to offer up this trade while I can. If they don't take the trade and I get to hit them, then I can like Kavu or something. Um, but if it's like this and they do take the trade, then I get a threat out of the way that Scavenging Ooze. I get the Kavu down. I know I'm going to be swinging in with a 5/5 Kavu next turn. And then I can get Sacred Foundry off this Bloodstained Mire, so I know I'm going to have like a 1-mana Leyline Binding plus a Hearse. But it looks like they did not hit their second land drop, so they decided to scoop it up. Let's go to match number 2. We win another die roll because we are extremely lucky. Opening hand, solid opening hand. We've got just like old school Grixis feels, a few fetch lands or a couple fetch lands and a shock. Thoughtseize, Shadow, Bolt, Stubborn Denial, like very, very 2017 reminiscent. The thing we do have to keep in mind though with hands like this is our mana is not perfect. So in a perfect shadow world, we'd want to do something like Fetch Shock Thoughtseize on 1 to set up Fetch Shock Shadow on 2. Maybe we go like Fetch Shock Thoughtseize off an Overgrown Tomb into Fetch Shock Steam Vents, or Fetch Shock Overgrown Tomb Thoughtseize into Fetch Shock Shadow off Steam Vents here to hold up Bolt or Stubborn Denial. And like that's a fine opening. But then we have to have a 4th land to hit white mana, which with Dromoka's Command and Leyline Binding to Fairy all in our main deck is like pretty big ask. So if I can help it, I never really want to go to a 4th land to uh, to get the all 5 colors online. So instead, I'm just going to kind of roll with the punches of what I'm given, go for just like the Blood Crypt into Thoughtseize so I can kind of delay what I'm getting with on these. Worst case scenario is I can always like Blood Crypt Thoughtseize turn 1, and then if I need to go fast, I can like fetch shock a Sacred Foundry or something, bolt myself and play a Shadow, and then turn 3 get like a breeding pool off the polluted delta, and that'll get all of my colors online for turn 3. It does delay me getting down the Shadow, but I'm kind of hoping that there's enough matchups in Modern that it's not gonna hurt me. Like I said, I've got that oh crap button of I'm up against Tron. I need to move fast so I can bolt myself, play out the Shadow, but it keeps me that ability to get all of my colors online. Uh, so Thoughtseize sees Dolthy bolt Night's Whisper, a few lands. Decided to just go ahead and take the Night's Whisper. I can bolt the Dolthy. I do have to now wait till I get down below 10 life to play Shadow so it doesn't get bolted. I could take the Dolthy and play on like Stubborn Denying the Night's Whisper, but if they wait until like turn 3, that plan kind of falls apart. So Teferi makes me glad I didn't mess up my mana on turn 1, so now I have the ability to fetch up a blue and a white source off these instead of where I would have been missing a color if I'd gone for like turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 Shadow, hold up these. So let's go ahead and bolt the Dolphy. Fetch and Shock Breeding Pool. So now we can just like Fetch and Shock Sacred Foundry. And we've got all of our colors online. Like the fairy tick up. Now Teferi's not dead to like a Invoked Fury. It is dead to Evoke Fury plus Bolt, but that means there are 3 unknown cards would have had to have been uh, Fury, Bolt, and we know that they drew the Blackcleave Cliffs and played it, and they drew the Marsh Flats and played it. So we know 3 of their 4 cards in hand. I should not have thought seized here. I should have played the Shadow, played the Polluted Delta, ticked up the Teferi, and passed the turn. And thought seized on their draw step. Because the Bolt wasn't going to kill the Teferi or the Shadow, but I could have taken something that would. Or better yet, if they had like a Seasoned Pyromancer or something, I could have taken that I wouldn't be able to Stubborn Denial. So we decided to just go ahead and get a draw in there. This opponent would have to waste mana on their turn to deal with the Teferi. I could have fetched and shocked, but I didn't want to go into bolt range. Like they do still have an unknown or 2 unknowns. I think I know about mountain, and that's it. So I don't want to put myself in a position where they could just like randomly top deck 2 bolts and I die. And it takes a nice little 4 ball to the face to draw a card. It'll push, gets Stubborn Denial to make sure we have lethal next turn. And they scoop it up there. So on to game 2. Game 2 against Black Red. We don't know if it's mid range or if it's scam. Castle Lochthwain definitely makes me think just like mid range, but I've been out of it for a minute, so scam could be a possibility. Sideboarding, boarding out like 4 Thoughtseize and the Thoughtseize Mirror because I just want more cards that do something. Board out a couple Stubborn Denial and Teamer Battle Rage because in these removal matchups, you're way less likely to keep a threat on board. It's probably going to get terminated or fatal pushed or something. So having cards that rely on your creatures being alive on the battlefield is very, very wishful thinking. Then boarded in like the 2 unlicensed Hearse to help with things like Croxa, help with Undying Evil effects if they do happen to be playing those. Bringing in EE to help with something like Seasoned Pyromancer, maybe Blood Moon if I can play it out proactively. And then Veil of Summers and Geist of St. Drafts. The Veil of Summer is pretty self-explanatory. Geist dodges removal. So not a lot to say about the sideboarding in this matchup. But I will say that like I'll make some hedge sideboard decisions like the 1 Engineered Explosives because I don't know what my opponent's playing yet. If it turns out they're on more like Spyro and Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Ragavan, I've got like a bunch of 0 cost things to blow up, then EE looks a lot better. But if it turns out they're on more of like hard cast Furies and Griefs and stuff and Rankle, I don't know, then EE is probably a lot worse for me. But because I won game 1, I get to be a little more flexible game 2 instead of having to like fully commit to one plan or the other. 6 lands and a shadow is pretty atrocious, so easy shit there. 2 lands, 2 lands and a Goy stub, reasonable enough. Like Polluted Delta can get our Mardu Triumph, then Breeding Pool gives us all of our colors. So Leyline Binding's 1. We can still play Goy on 2 off that. So Throw back the Stubborn Denial here. It's a ways off of being online. And Ragavan for our opponents, kind of like worst case scenario for us. So we draw the Mardu Triome. We need to fetch it out if we draw it. Then they Thoughtseize, take our Leyline Bindings. Now we cannot Leyline Binding the Ragavan, but we can at least get a Shadow down. Not Shadow, Tarmogoyf. But Tarmogoyf is not long for this world. So this is a pretty stereotypical case of Ragavan being a very, very snowbally creature. Like the turn one Ragavan going unanswered, being backed up with like a tempo Delver style plan of hand disruption and removal spells. Just really, really, what's a good word for it? Disallows your opponent from staying around in the game at all. So decided to take this hit from Ragavan because I know they're not going to be able to kill the Geist, and I don't want to just like get rid of my whole clock. Hardcast Fury. So let's get down a couple spells here. This is going to be a couple weird decisions here. I'll kind of talk through them a little bit as they show up. So my opponent's attacking with both. I don't want to lose both of my threats for nothing. So I end up deciding to block the Tarmogoyf on the Ragavan and the Geist chump block the Fury. The reason for this is I don't want my opponent to have a lightning bolt, and I block Goyf on Fury. They bolt the Goyf, and the first strike damage kills it. So then I would just like lose both of my threats. They'd still have a Fury around. At least this way, they kill my Geist. I get to eat their Ragavan. Goyf doesn't die to bolt, and I can always block the Fury again next turn. So I think if they had like a terminate, they just terminate the Goyf and attack. They don't worry about how I block. So Geist dies, Ragavan dies, and this was a little bit of a punt on my end. So I exiled the Terminate. I thought I had an instant in my graveyard. I did not. So the Goyf shrunk to a 4/5, so they could have bolted it. But if they did bolt it, bolt goes to the graveyard. Goyf lives, grows back up to a 5/6. So if they had like double bolt or something, they could have killed the Goyf anyway. But not the important part. The important part is I wasn't thinking about the card types that I didn't have under unlicensors, or I didn't have in my graveyard carefully enough. So it could have led to a worse result than it did. Very long winded there saying that. All right. So Kraken with Goyf. Play Kavu, because Kavu, just like the Goyf last turn, can block the Fury. If they don't have a bolt, can trade off. If they do have a bolt, here I kind of decided I just didn't want to lose my Kavu. Like making that same decision I made last turn of if they have a bolt, I really don't want to like trade off one of my 4 or 5 toughness guys for a bolt instead of trading it off for the Fury. So I crew up the hearse, decide to go to blocks because if they have the block and they use it on the hearse ahead of time, I can eat a couple things and hearse lives. if they let me go to blocks, then at least if I go to activate it and they bolt now, then I still get to block the Fury. So either way is kind of an okay result for me. But Fury ends up just dying. Spyro comes down. They had a Ragavan, so they really didn't have anything. Draw into a Terminate, which is pretty annoying. And we find us the start of a nice little land pocket. So let's add Gigantha to hand. It passes with a Spyro up. Lands. Only 19 lands in this deck. But we do have a Goyf and a Gigantha. Evoke Fury on the Goyf, and then have the Undying effect. So they do get to kill our Goyf. It's unfortunate that like there are 3 blind cards there where Fury, red card, Undying effect. And then here, I have 2 options. Option number 1 is sit back with a Gigantha. They attack with a Fury, and I can either like chump with the Gigantha or trade with the Fury, and they're left with the Spyro and then potentially Spyro tokens. Uh, Option number 2 is don't attack with the Gigantha. Take it when they attack me, but there's nothing that I top deck that deals with the Spyro and lets me do the extra point of damage. Well, I guess I could top deck. No, I sided out the Battle Rage. This is game 2. No Battle Rage in the deck. Option number 3 is I could attack, and the hope is that they block because they're afraid of Bolt or something. And then I take 8 on the Fury on the crackback, and I just have to find something to like deal with the Fury from there. Essentially, all roads kind of lead to I have to find an answer to Fury next turn or I die regardless. So we'll just get the Spyro out of the way. They'll hit us back for a chunk. And Ragavan does not deal with the Fury, nor does it attack with through Spyro tokens very well. So it was kind of like I don't think the decision really matters, but you could absolutely make the argument of not attacking with the Gigantha. Maybe the play is like don't attack with the Gigantha, and my opponent doesn't attack with the Fury. But to me, it like doesn't make a lot of sense that they wouldn't attack with the Fury since they get to keep the board presence afterwards. But either way, there you are. So this hand, pretty reasonable. We got the Veil of Summer early, so if they go for like an Evoked Grief or a Thoughtseize or whatever, we can Veil. Wooded Foothills can get Overgrown Tomb, and then Tomb, Steam Vent, Sacred Foundry gives us all 5 colors, as well as Teferi on 3. We don't need the mana, and I don't really care for Stubborn Denial, which we end up drawing anyway. Decide to just go ahead and get a Triumph. So if we found a Kavu, we could play out a 5/5 Kavu on 2 with the Sultai Triumph and the Sacred Foundry. Plus, it's like Overgrown Tomb with an extra color. So get Ragavan down, and obviously hope here is my opponent goes for like Bolt or Fatal Push or something here, and I can Stubborn Denial or Veil of Summer. Then if we go to their turn and they play like a 2-drop, maybe a Dolthy or something, then I could look at like attack, Teferi, bounce, Well, they do play a 2-drop, but not the one I want to see. Not that a 2 or turn 2 naked Turok's like the worst thing in the world to have to deal with, but it's kind of annoying. So Sacred Foundry, get down Ragavan number 2. He's fine. So Dolphy and Evoke Grief. So we're going to go ahead and cash in this Veil of Summer. And they're going to feign death. So I'm assuming the feign death is just to keep this this grief around, because I'm assuming they know that they can't target me, is what I'm saying. So they're doing this with the purpose of just keeping the grief around. Which I know I don't want to bounce the grief with the Teferi. I guess it wouldn't be like the worst idea in the world, but either way, I'm just gonna stub the feign death and get rid of the grief. So let's crack in with Ragavan. Well, I'm not playing Blood Moon, but this does let us go ahead and get Shadow down. Maybe that was too aggressive, because I am setting myself up for a really bad time if my opponent's got a Fury and a red card and they can just like wipe my board. So maybe I was supposed to wait on the Shadow for a turn, but I was kind of hoping it would just be this where they replay the Dolphy. This was a mistake this turn. Correct play. Play the Overgrown Tomb, attack. What Michael doesn't do, play the Overgrown Tomb and attack. What Michael does do, attack. Why I didn't play the Overgrown Tomb, I could not begin to tell you. Like, it changes the clock from 4 turns to 3. It's just right all around to play the Overgrown Tomb. But for whatever reason, I didn't. I could have even gone like Overgrown Tomb, attack for 5, cycle the Triome looking for something, or EE blow up the Dolphy and then hold up the Triome. Whatever. Didn't do it. So now I'm like, okay, well, I'll just hold on to the Overgrown Tomb for next turn. Uh, Maybe I don't want my opponent knowing I've got extra damage rolled up. This also keeps it so that if my opponent does have a Fury, they can kill all 3 of my guys, and now it's turn 5. Thankfully, they don't have a Fury. Unfortunately, they have a Turok that gets rid of the land that I was holding on to anyway. So yet again, playing out the Overgrown Tomb would have made this a 3-2 instead of a 4-3. So then I could just keep attacking into it and be fine. So just goes to show yet again, don't make stupid plays. Just play your cards. Here we are, still terrified of a Fury. There's an Undying Malice. Malakir Rebirth is a land. All right, so Unholy Heat's a really good pickup. I only have 3 card types in my yard. Luckily, Planeswalker is a card type that is not currently in my yard. So I can just bounce a token, add that to my yard. Now I've got Unholy Heat, the Turok, and crack in with everybody. They decide to go for the double block on the Shadow, which is fine with me. I'll trade the Shadow for 2 of their guys, get the Ragavan hit, and I can still play out my Giganta. Now I'm not just like dead to Fury. So see what kind of removal spell our opponent has. Pyro tokens, yep. Assume 1/1 on Gigantha and Ragavan. Alright, and I'm not really afraid of something like Damnation, so we're just playing out all of our dudes as we see them. Healthy, Magus, and scoop it up. So 2-0 somehow. On to match number 3. Lose our first die roll of the night. So opening hand's reasonable. We've got turn 1 Ragavan or Bolt. Polluted Delta can get our Sultai Triumph, so we can get a 5/5 Kavu if we want to go with that instead of playing out the Ragavan on turn 1. We can also get like Sacred Foundry on 1 for Ragavan into Overgrown Tomb on 2 for Kavu. Get a 4/4 Kavu down as well as Black Far Shadows. So, bunch of options we got available. Kind of depending on what our opponent does. Basic planes go means I have no idea. I expect like hammer time. And if so, backing up before this turn, if it's hammer time and they didn't play a 1-drop, I'd rather have Ragavan down because now if they go to turn 2 with like a Pure Steel Paladin or a Stone Forge or something like that, I can bolt it and get my Ragavan attack through. But if they go for, if I go like turn 1 tap land, like Polluted Delta for Sultai Triumph, and they play a Stone Forge or Pure Steel or something on turn 2, then I have to waste my entire turn 2 just casting a Lightning Bolt. And that feels awful for me. So I'd rather lead on the Ragavan so I can clear Sling out with Bolt, hit with the Ragavan, and then play like a Kavu afterwards or something. Opponent plays a Devoted Druid, so there's no chance that they are blocking this. So we can just start getting like a bit of a mana advantage going. Down. Fuck, yeah. 4/4 Kavu. Go ahead and bolt the Druid. So Stoneforge for Batterskull and an Aether Vial. I don't think I've seen a Devoted Druid deck playing Aether Vial. So that was kind of interesting. And blocks Ragavan. That's fine. We can just get down down a couple threats. So I decided to play. I could have played Goyf Shadow. The downside is if I don't find a way to lower my life total, Shadow's just smaller than Ragavan, but I could dash the Ragavan next turn. I kind of decided to play it out because I'm expecting to not find a way to lose life, and Ragavan can trade with things like Stoneforge, where Shadow just wouldn't be able to attack into it, and they're not throwing a Stoneforge in front of one of these. Ragavan can trade with a Giver of Runes, where Shadow cannot. Fauna Shaman's kind of a interesting one. Interesting card choice. So yeah, they were just gonna throw away the Shadow, like not doing anything for us. So we've got a few options here. We could like play Teferi, bounce the Fauna Shaman, hold up Leyline Binding. We could play the Kavu, hold up Binding. It's kind of like an all roads lead to Rome kind of situation, where as long as we're interacting with something somewhere, probably fine. So just decide to like get Teferi down, bounce the Shaman. Now I'm holding up Leyline Binding, so whatever happens is kind of fine. Welcome to another episode of Michael's Brain Fart. So we attack all out, not the brain fart. Opponent goes to blocks, still not the brain fart. All we got to do is battle rage a Tarmogoyf. That's it. Battle rage, targeting Tarmogoyf, game over. We don't do that. We battle rage a territorial Kavu because, for whatever reason in my mind, and this is why uh, pro players and Grand Prix competitors and SCG competitors, whoever, always spend so much time reading cards over the course of the event because we as humans are stupid. I'm stupid. I was so sure that Burnt and Forge Tender just said, like, prevent all damage the next time a red source of your choice would deal damage this turn. Like, prevent the next instance of damage. So I was like, okay, Teamer Battle Rage. If they don't sack Forge Tender, I trample over for 4 on the first strike, and then regular strike, trample over for 4 plus Ragavan, they're dead. If they sack Forge Tender on the Kavu, I prevent the first 5 damage. The second strike hits through, deals 5 plus the 2 from Ragavan. They're dead. Whatever. Nope, that's not what Burnt and Forge Tender says. This thing says prevent all damage from the sorcerer choice would deal this turn. First strike, normal strike, fighting, whatever. Prevent it. So I battle rage this Kavu. My opponent's like, haha, you're an idiot. I'm gonna blank the Kavu. So now I'm just sitting here doing 2. But on the bright side, I still just have like another Kavu. I've got Leyline Binding. It would take a really special hand for my opponent to get out of this. And they're viling in Fauna Shaman. If they'd viled in a, what's it called, Devoted Druid, I'd probably Leyline Binding it, but that is not Devoted Druid. So they pack it up there. We go to game 2. Moral of the story, read the cards. Even when you think you know what they do, you don't know what they do. So board outs, 4 copies of Stubborn Denial because treating this just like the Heliod Company decks, where there's just such a plethora of creatures to interact with, like counter spells for a non-creature spell doesn't really matter. They could have Cord or bring in Path to Exile, something like that. So it's not the craziest idea to leave a copy of Stubborn Denial in, or maybe 2. But for me, I'd rather focus on the spot removal and not worry about the cards that are more than likely dead. So board out the 4 Stubborn Denials, board in the 2 copies of Engineered Explosives. I boarded in 1 copy of Geist of St. Traff, just as like an extra creature that can turn sideways, since I'm boarding out all these Stubborn Denials and stuff. And the last board in was the Collector Oof. Because I'm like, okay, I saw Aether Vial and I saw Stoneforge Mystic. So Collector Oof can stop equipment from getting strapped up onto like the Devoted Druid. Because I assume if there's Devoted Druid and Stoneforge, they're playing the sword that goes infinite with Devoted Druid. And Collector Oof stops that from getting equipped, stops Aether Vial activation. The only thing it hurts for me is EE activation and Ragavan tokens. But we'll see if those end up mattering. Deal our Pokemon. Full House, Goyfs over Shadows. Unfortunately, only 1 land and no great interaction. So we could get like a Mardu Triome here, try to top deck another land to get a breeding pool and get Goyf online. But we're praying for a land. If we don't hit the land, the hand's dead. Even if we do hit a land, all we're doing is playing like a 1-2 Goyf and then maybe getting to fight something eventually. So throw this away. Second hand's a lot better. We've got Uh, two pieces of interaction. We've got Bobble to help find a third. We've got a threat. We just throw back like the Triome. We know this Goy on our side is going to be a 4 or 5 with 1, 2, 3, 4 card types. If we get to bolt something, all of a sudden it's a 5, 6. So, reasonably sized gentleman. Giver of runes. So, bobble myself, see another bobble, which I don't really care about. Going to go ahead and kill the giver because I don't want my opponent to go like turn 2 Stoneforge and me not be able to bolt it. But if they go turn 2 Stoneforge now, then I can always thought seize whatever they get off the Stoneforge. So. Then we thought seize to make sure we're not dead. Which this Luxior is the equipment that goes infinite with Devoted Druid. So if you don't know this one, you strap up a creature, gets +1/+1 for each counter on it. So when Devoted Druid taps, makes green, and then untaps, you put a -1/-1 counter on it to pay to untap it. So it gets a -1/-1 counter. Then Luxior gives it a static +1/+1 for each -1/-1 counter. Nets out to 0. So you can just infinitely tap it because every time you put a counter on it, it gets bigger statically with Luxior. So next turn, our opponent would have been able to just kill us. They play Horizon Canopy, play the Luxior 3 with the Devoted Druid to strap the Luxior up to the Devoted Druid, untap it, tap it, untap it, Walking Ballista, shoot us. That sounds too cheeky for me, so I'm just going to say, like, no, Luxior is gone. We can figure out another way of killing us. That out of here. I'll have to deal with a 2/2 Walking Ballista next turn, but I'd much rather deal with a 2/2 Walking Ballista than be dead. So they played out the Canopy, so we don't know their unknown card in hand. Usually you'll see me getting Triomes when I don't need to cast anything because I really don't want to draw the Triome. Could have played Teferi there and ticked up, but I didn't want them to be able to kill my Teferi. They could just like pay 4, pump up the Ballista, attack the Teferi, shoot it twice, and Teferi's down. Again, getting Triome because I really don't want to draw it. Keep the clock going. So I see Eladamri's Call and Viridian Longbow. Longbow, I think, is just like a win condition that they can tutor up off of Stoneforge Mystic. If they've already got like Devoted Druid plus Luxior, they can untap it infinitely with Devoted Druid. Instead of floating green, they just tap to ping you. So we're just going to get rid of the Eladamri's Call so they can't go get like a Stoneforge to get another Luxior. Because the Longbow just by itself doesn't do anything that I care about. So we'll just get that out of there. Got to keep an eye on our life total because if opponent like pro-reds the Walking Ballista, attacks in, let's say they hit the land, pro-red the Walking Ballista, they attack in for 3, put us to 8, they can ping us down to 5, and that would be kind of rough. Like that's getting towards sketchy territory. But if they don't pro-red it or something, then this becomes putting them on the back foot a lot because now I get to attack freely. They can't pump the Walking Ballista. They can take 10 if they don't want to lose something. Or they can block and protect. But if they don't want to block and protect and they don't want to take something or lose a creature, they got to take 10. But them doing this means I just get to like free roll to fairy. I'm gonna bounce the druid because I don't want to. I don't want to have the druid with no summoning sickness out there. And if they want to ping the Teferi, cool. Like, if you ping Teferi, you're getting farther off of killing me, so. And this is going to be a pretty sweet line that I did not think about. So, draw Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize is obviously fantastic. With Teferi, I can just like snag their draw step and they can't just like find something to combo off on me there. So we add Gigantha, pass the turn. On their draw step, we go for the Thoughtseize. And I did not even think about this. That they can just respond to the Thoughtseize with pinging down the Teferi. So if they had something like a cord, they could cord for 2 right now before I can take it. But they have better than a cord. They have a Solitude, which was not on my radar at all. So now they've got a Solitude backed up with a Giver of Runes, and that's way, way worse for me than it should be. I don't have an attack here because they just block with the Solitude, pro green it, they gain 3 life, and I accomplish nothing. So instead, we're just going to work on kind of overwhelming this Solitude. Fetchland's really nice because this gets Shadow above 4 toughness, which means they can't block it with Solitude, pro black the Solitude, and then ping the Shadow. So if they block something with Solitude, like say they block the biggest thing, the Tarmogoyf, and they take the 9 here, even with the 3 life that they gain, they die. So they have to block 2 creatures. They're going to pro black the Solitude. We'll deal our damage. And they're going to go to ping the Shadow, but luckily we've got that nifty little fetch land there. And here, I don't really know what the worst thing they could draw is. Maybe not even Batter Skull. I don't think they care about Batter Skull. I really don't know what they would draw there. But regardless, we draw the EE. And this is kind of an interesting spot because I've got 3 options. Option number 1 is we just go to a combat and attack. And they have to block 2 things and they're still dead. Or no, if they block 2 things and ping us, then they go up to 6 and they're not dead. So they block like Devoted Druid on Goyf, Solitude on Shadow, take 5 from the Gigantha, ping us. They gain 3 off the Solitude to 5, 1 off the ping, go to 6, take 5, go to 1. Lose their whole board. We keep our whole board. Great. Option number 2 is we play EE on 2. So we blow up the Devoted Druid and the Tarmogoyf. We attack in with Gigantha and Shadow. Again, they have to block 1, take 1. They gain 4, go to 6, take 5, go to 1. Same result, except they don't have a Devoted Druid. We don't have a Tarmogoyf. If we attack with all, they don't have a Devoted Druid. We still have a Tarmogoyf. So that seems like a worse option. Option number 3 is we play EE on 5. Not something you get to say in a Shadow deck very often, but we have the ability to do it. We can blow up the EE, take out Solitude and Gigantha, attack with our Goyf and our Shadow, and if our opponent doesn't have anything, they die. If they do have a removal spell, then we blew up our Giganta. They kill like our Tarmogoyf, chump block the Shadow, and it's going to top deck mode on their side. Uh, Ultimately, I decide the not playing EE plan is the safest because it lets us, if our opponent doesn't have anything, we don't lose anything on our board, and then we can just like play EE on 2 or something post combat to protect ourselves from like post mortem lunge, which by itself wouldn't even do anything, but like post mortem lunge plus something in hand, which I have no idea if they play post mortem lunge or not. I doubt they do, but it was the only consideration I could come up with. So we attack with all. Opponent blocks. They ping us. And their unknown card is a Path to Exile. They do Path to Exile our Tarmogoyf. We get to kill the Solitude, get him for 5 with the Giganta. And since they pathed our Tarmogoyf instead of like the Giganta, I'm going to go ahead and EE on 2 and take out the Devoted Druid. So now I don't have to worry about like a non-summoning sick Devoted Druid. And if they did come in with like a post-mortem lunge or something, they can't lunge plus something else. So feel that one. So somehow 3-0 on to match number 4. Losing the die roll, but winning hearts. Opening hand, pretty solid. Got a couple threats. We got Bolt for interaction, Bobble to help grow the Goyf, as well as filter draws a little bit. Spirable of Ragavan almost assuredly means Murktide to some capacity. So Sacred Foundry lets us play out Bolt on turn 1. We can get like Overgrown Tomb for Goyf on 2, and then as long as Polluted Delta gets a blue source, then we've got all of our line or all of our cards online, all of our colors. No 2-drop out of them. We find Stubborn Denial, so that makes me like I'm worried if I just play Overgrown Tomb Tarmogoyf and they counter spell, then I go to their turn with like open mana and I'm in a bit of a rough spot. So I lead with Ragavan, kind of hoping that they'll counterspell this and maybe I just Stubborn Denial the counterspell. But instead they just go for the Bolt, which either means their hand is kind of weak, uh, or they just have like a whole bunch of interaction and don't really have threats. Maybe they have a Murktide, but regardless, we're going to soft stub this expressive iteration here. I'm also, this match really showed me like how absurdly easy it is for this deck to get Delirium online, like consistently. Right there, they 5 cards, 5 different card types. I'm sitting here with my Tarmogoyfs that are stuck at 5/6, which is obviously not where you want to be against a deck with Unholy Heat. And like I said, the ability to get Delirium online so easily. So more iterations. More iterations. This is one of those turns where mana is a little bit awkward. Like, we would love to have a green source that's not Overgrown Tomb so that we could play out all of our threats this turn. Like, it looking at the board right now, it feels like we should be pretty ahead, right? 2/5/6 Goyfs, a 4/4 Shadow, nothing dies to Bolt. We're not dying to Bolt. We don't have to worry about counter spells. And then it's just like, oh, here's one little seemingly dull play, a Ledger Shredder and Unholy Heat to take out Tarmogoyf. Okay, what's next? We draw dead. Let's attack in. Now all of a sudden it's Ledger Shredder plus Bolt to take out Shadow. And I'm down to just a Goyf. And then Murktide. And it feels like all the work we did is just kind of undone. Like, oh, here's an 8/8 flyer. Outsizes everything you got. Plus, we followed up with a 3/3 flyer. Okay, so had to think about this one. If I don't attack, I'm just dead in the air. Period. Like, nothing I can do about that. So my hope is if I attack both, I'm presenting lethal. Option number one is they chump one of my two guys with Dragon's Rage Channeler, call it a day, and then I'm not just dead to the Murktide. Option number two is they block one thing with the Murktide, they take the damage off the other one, but they've seen Lightning Bolt. So I'm kind of hoping that they'll double block one of each, because if they block Murktide on Goyf and they chump or they like take the damage off Shadow, and I have a Lightning Bolt, and they just die and they can't pay for it with like Spell Pierce, or they can't counter it with Spell Pierce because I can pay for it. So I figure if I attack with both, they're not going to want to go down to 3. And I was wrong. So cycle Street Wraith in case we hit, or cycle Zagoth Triome in case we hit Lightning Bolt or Teamer Battle Rage. Nope. Game 2. Kind of a rough one. Like, if I'd fetched black mana more aggressively, then I could have been able to, like, Tarmogoyf plus double Shadow that turn sooner, and maybe I'm able to swarm. But only being able to play, like, one Shadow meant we were just, like, a turn behind. Sideboarding against Murktide, taking out the Thought Seizes in favor of more interaction. Like, brought in the 2 copies of Unlicensed Hearse, 1 copy of Veil of Summer, just help out with like Archmage's Charm and counter spells and stuff like that. Board out Teamer Battle Rage because they've got so many counter spells. They've got bounce effects like Brazen Borrower sometimes. Ragavan's pretty bad in the face of opposing Ragavans, Dragon's Rage Channeler, Ledger Shredder, Bolt, Unholy Heat, and then Kavu just straight up dies to the Dress Down if they have it. But going back after game 2, I would have preferred to have the 4th Kavu still in the deck, so we can kind of see how that plays out. And then brought in the 2 Geist because it dodges all their removal and attacks for a reasonable chunk. So pretty good opening hand. We've got turn 1 Stubborn Denial if we want it, or we can just go like turn 1 Triumph, turn 2 5/5 Kavu. And I'll kind of mention a few little interesting tricks here that I kind of thought about as the match went on. For example, if my opponent does go for like a Dress Down while I have Kavu out, you can Dromoka's Command and put a 1/1 counter on it and save it from the Dress Down. Also, you can Dromoka's Command. Like, nobody ever pays attention to the first line that prevent all damage from instant or sorceries. You can blank like an Unholy Heat or something with it. It's pretty nice. Sack a Blood Moon. So Kavu's got 2 options on attack. You can either exile a card from a graveyard, or up to a card, or you can discard a card, and if you do, draw a card. Because of the discard, if you do draw a card, you have to discard first, and there's really nothing in my hand that I'm like actively wanting to discard. So I'm just going to choose to not exile anything. You can choose to not discard something either, but just saying you don't have to choose an effect. And then I decided not to play out the Tarmogoyf because I don't want to let it just get bolted, and B, I don't want to like play into a counter spell if I don't have to. Like with Kavu here, I'm winning the race against my opponent holding up mana pretty aggressively. So and pretty safely just wait. Then here, really expecting my opponent to have counter spell. They don't have the counter spell there. They choose not to use it. So I'm just going to go ahead and like fire off this Dromoka's command. If they want to counter it, cool. If they don't want to counter it, cool. Either way, I'm just out here to get my opponent in the face with some dudes. I could have played Tarmogoyf that last turn. I chose not to hold up Stubborn Denial and Leyline Binding, or Stubborn Denial and Dromoka's Command, or Leyline Binding and Dromoka's Command. Uh, Mainly, I just didn't think the Tarmogoyf was like doing a ton for me here, and if I played Goyf, I couldn't hold up Stubborn Denial. So essentially, chose to hold up like multiple pieces of interaction instead of Goyf and exactly Leyline Binding. And like Stubborn Denial's pretty good card when you get to take out an expressive iteration. So could have gone for an end of turn Dromoka's command there, which might have been okay, but I was kind of worried my opponent would like Unholy Heat, flip over Delirium, and get to kill my Kavu. And I really didn't want them killing my Kavu there. But now we get to play out Goyf. And this is just kind of taking the not necessarily the passive approach, just the hey, I don't have to fire off stuff. Like I'm winning the board pretty well. I don't care about Murktide right now. My opponent's got no instant sorceries in the yard. I kind of don't need to play into something stupid. And this is another case of like, hey, how easily can this opponent or this deck rebuild Delirium out of just nowhere? And it's like this. So they got Channeler, Ragavan in the yard. Cool. Indeterminate Archmage's Charm, untap, play a Bauble, play Expressive Iteration, and now they're right back up to Delirium with a couple more cards in hand. There's Murktide. 2 mana, 2 cards in hand. Counterspell on the Leyline Binding. Sure, so we'll just Dromoka's command, put a counter on the Kavu, fight the Murktide, and that is game over there. So Dromoka's command looking really strong that match, or that game. Still got another game in the match. Game 3, I did bring the 4th Kavu back in over the 2nd Geist. lower the curve a little bit. EE is a card that I've brought in from time to time against Murktide, but I feel like every time I bring it in, expecting to take out a couple channelers or channeler Ragavan or something, they just have a handful of Murktides and it doesn't do anything. Hand's okay. We've got good cheap interaction. The mana's a little awkward. If I want to have like Unholy Heat or Lightning Bolt on one or on two, I've got to play Savai Triumph on one, which on the draw can be pretty rough. So, but then opponent does not play a Steam Vents here. So I should have just played the Savai Triumph right here. I should have thrown this out and I could have gotten Breeding Pool or Steam Vents or whatever off the Polluted Delta. Doesn't matter. I should have just gotten the tapped land out of the way. The tapped land that makes red and white while my opponent's not doing anything. But I was kind of thinking, like, okay, well, they didn't play Ragavan on one. I kind of want to be tempo positive and, like, Lightning Bolt a Ledger Shredder on two, like on their instep and untap my mana and get to Hearse or something. Shouldn't have done it. Because now this throws me way off curve because I don't have red mana and I just keep drawing red cards when I could have had Zagoth Triome down last turn, or I could have had Savai Triumph down last turn. And then this turn I could have played like the Polluted Delta, gone and gotten Steam Vents, but I could have played Ragavan out and gone from there, like Ragavan, hold up, bolt, something. I just could have used my mana way more efficiently in these early turns. Like, I know my opponent isn't doing anything here, but if I'm not doing anything either, they've got the draw power. They've got the Archmage's Charms, Expressive Iterations. They've got the Murktides and counter spells. Like, they've got the inevitability. I don't. And like this Zagoth Triome isn't letting me cast anything in my hand over here. So there's like very little reason to have it. Uh, Not only like on the battlefield right now, but in my deck in general. So Hearse into a counter spell. Opponent is down to 4 cards, but they've got a Blood Moon. Like, I've got Bolt Heat. I'm not just like dead in the water. I've got Gigantha yet again, and it's come up like all 3 games this match. Opponent found Delirium pretty quickly, so now I've got an opponent with Delirium. If they've got Unholy Heat for Gigantha, I'm in a pretty good bit of trouble. I just don't have anything else going on. I'm forever and a mile off of a Death Shadow. So I really want Gigantha to resolve so I can like Leyline Binding this Blood Moon, but got Unholy Heat. I could double bolt myself in Shadow, but that's just like not worth it for a 1/1 Shadow. I really need my opponent to hit me with something. I'm kind of hoping they'll find like a Dragon's Rage Channeler that they can hit me a few times. I can interact with it and get down Shadow. Modern staple Magmatic Channeler. So I can bolt myself, start to get Shadow online. That gives me my 4th card type for Delirium. Go to Unholy Heat the Channeler. They Aether Gust their own Channeler. Put it on top. Now I'll bolt myself, play Shadow. They've got another bolt, and I am dead in the water to this Channeler. So I'll give myself 1 draw step to draw something that I don't even know what it could be, and scoop it up there. So 3-0 to 3-1. On to the last match. In the die roll, reveal Gigantha. Opening hand with a bunch of red and white cards, no red and white mana, so ship that back. This hand's a little bit better. We could go like turn 1 Thoughtseize. We could go turn 1 Zagoth Triumph, turn 2 Tarmogoyf, turn 1 Triumph, turn 2 Swamp Thoughtseize, hold up Stub. Either way, they're better than the first hand. So let's just lead on the Triome, get that out of the way. Opponent plays a Valakut, so I'm assuming this is either Amulet Titan or some sort of a Scapeshift deck. Speak of the Devil. So with Thoughtseize, see double Dryad, Scapeshift, Expressive Iteration, double Flooded Strand in a Forest. Take the Dryad because it grows Tarmogoyf to a 4/5. So now I can attack through Dryads. I can get a somewhat reasonable clock. I've still got Stubborn Denial available. So I probably should have just Thoughtseized and taken the other Dryad here. Expressive Iteration is not like the end of the world. But if I don't hit another land, then I have to make the decision between like playing Tarmogoyf and holding up Stubborn Denial. And if I take the Expressive Iteration and they resolve the Dryad, then I have to deal with like Dryad plus extra land, and the next turn land, and potentially Scapeshift like as soon as next turn, 2 turns from now. So I should have Thoughtseized the Dryad. I ended up passing the turn here and got a little bailed out because my opponent went for the Expressive Iteration right away. Which, again, I didn't even have to counter. Like, I don't care about the Expressive Iteration very much. Stubborn Denial does grow my Tarmogoyf. Thoughtseize to take the extra Dryad. And at least at the moment, like, I'm out racing the Scapeshift pretty well. They top deck a Prismatic Ending, so that's fun. Ragavan gets an attack in. So now I've got Tarmogoyf and then Dash Ragavan next turn is lethal. They've got Flooded Strand, Forest, Scapeshift. So they cannot kill me next turn. But they can top deck a Bring to Light to be able to go get a Dryad. And play a fetch land. And with double Valakut, that gives them 4 Valakut triggers. They can kill Tarmogoyf, deal a little bit of damage to me. So I'd have to draw away to kill the Dryad. I do not. So next turn, they're able to just Scapeshift with what lands they have for lethal. So that was kind of an unfortunate way to go about that game. Again, I should have Thoughtseize the second Dryad on turn 3 and not cared about the Expressive Iteration. Just save the Stubborn Denial. Because if I had Thoughtseize the other Dryad, not cared about the Expressive Iteration, I could have either Stubborn Denial the Prismatic Ending to get my clock a turn sooner, or I could have Stubborn Denial the Bring to Light. And they wouldn't have had the Dryad, and I wouldn't have cared about the Scapeshift. So Either way, a couple options there that I did not follow through with. Sideboarding against Scapeshift. Took out like all the spot removal because none of this kills Dryad. Brought in the two Geist of St. Traps to speed up the clock a little bit. Brought in the two Fluster Storms. And that last one. Alpine Moon. Alpine Moon to name Valakut. I could have brought in Dry or Natural State for Dryad, but that's pretty weak, I think. And I still have Dromoka's Command in the main. Which, if I had something better to board out Dromoka's Command for, that probably would have been worth it. But I got so many slots. Pretty good opening hand. Turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Thoughtseize, Fluster Storm, something like that. Kind of the same conundrum we had match 1, game 1, where best case hand scenario would be like turn 1 Overgrown Tomb or turn 1 Sacred Foundry Ragavan. But no, we couldn't get Thoughtseize Shadow. So it'd have to be like turn 1 Overgrown Tomb, Thoughtseize, turn 2 some sort of red land, Steam Vents for Ragavan and Shadow. So it gets really trippy here if you really try to get Shadow online turn 2. But the safe play is kind of like Blood Crypt Ragavan on 1. Turn 2, you can Thoughtseize, play whatever other land you want to, and then try to go for a turn 3 Shadow online. Which I know is not like the Shadow way, preferably, but it's the best way to get Shadow online relatively quickly while still making sure you get like all of your colors online. Since even like post board here, we have spells of all 5 colors. Ragavan does help. If we knew without a shadow of a doubt that Ragavan was going to live, then we could get like turn 1 Fetch Shock, Sacred Foundry, turn 2 Fetch Shock, Overgrown Tomb, Thoughtseize, Shadow off the treasure token. But if they just have like a bolt or a prismatic ending or something, then that entire plan like goes to hell. Okay, so we Thoughtseize them. We see Double Dryad, Leyline Binding, Expressive Iteration, Supreme Verdict, couple lands. Decided to take the Verdict because with this Double Dryad, they don't have a bunch of extra land drops. They don't have a Valakut, which is great. But with the Double Dryad and the Leyline Binding, I'm going to have to commit to the board like very aggressively. And I don't want my opponent just going Verdict, wipe everything away. Fluster Storm can help fight over like Expressive Iteration. Maybe I find a Stubborn Denial that helps fight over Leyline Binding, but I just can't give my opponent the free like reset button here. We do top deck the Prismatic Ending for Ragavan, but we've got the Fluster Storm. I'd rather keep the Ragavan around than worry about Fluster storming the Expressive Iteration. It's probably not even happening for like 3 more turns. So instead, we're just going to get our Shadow on. Turn 3, triple Shadows, not the worst. Try an extra land. So they have the ability to Leyline Binding here since the Windswept Heath can tap for whatever with the Dryad. They should have just main phased the Leyline Binding because they know that I'm playing Stubborn Denial. They saw it last game. Not that Stubborn Denial like saves me here or anything, but I think it's just a card that like you can freely play around by Leyline Binding on your turn. And there's no way you're Leyline Binding anything other than a Death Shadow, right? Duration. Dryad. Leyline Binding's gone. Those are gone. Blooded Strand is gone. So they've got one unknown that I don't know about. My worst enemies are Scapeshift, Bring to Light, and Valakut. Valakut would be able to trigger itself, shoot a shadow, fetch, shoot another shadow. Stubborn Denial helps me against either, what is it, Scapeshift or Bring to Light. So I do have a Ferocious Tarmogoyf, but they draw don't have anything, so we are on to game number 3. So, game number 3. And changed in the sideboard. Reveal our Pokemon. Reasonable opening hand. Again, we've kind of got like Steam Vents off the Wooded Foothills for Ragavan. Then we've got Flusterstorm up. We can play Zagoth Triome on 2. If we hit with the Ragavan, we can play Tarmogoyf, something like that. We don't have white for Leyline Binding, but a treasure token can get us there. Worst case scenario would be we play Steam Vents Ragavan on 1. Our opponent plays Renin 6 and down ticks, but at least we do have an Unholy Heat. Second Wooded Foothills means we can get a Second Wooded Foothills means that we could get a Breeding Pool or an Overgrown Tomb or something to play out Tarmogoyf on 2. But I kind of want to just kill this Renin 6. They haven't played a fetch land, but that doesn't mean I trust them. Then holding up the Wooded Foothills in case we needed to Flusterstorm something. Like, they've been pretty good about aggressively expressive iteration before, so I was kind of hoping maybe I would catch them with an aggressive iteration there. So Tarmogoyf eats a Prismatic Ending, and all we're kind of looking for here is like another fetch land. So Prismatic Ending, Bring to Light, Scapeshift. They only have 4 lands. Options. Options. So we could take the Prismatic Ending, play out a Shadow, hope our opponent doesn't top deck like a land to be able to Bring to Light. If they do get off Bring to Light, then Dryad means that if they hit another land, they can Scapeshift for lethal. They can also just hit like a Supreme Verdict that kills our Shadow and our clock's just dead. Got no pressure whatsoever. And they've got Escape Shift. We could take like the Scape Shift or take the Bring to Light, try to set up Shadow plus Stubborn Denial. But that's only if we hit a fetch land. Like, if we don't hit a fetch land, then we've got a 1/1 Shadow and a Soft Stub and nothing to do. So we're just going to play out or take the Prismatic Ending so we can play out a Shadow next turn. But for now, we'll just hold up Stubborn Denial in case maybe we can hit this Bring to Light. Which they missed the land for. Still. Alright. Fetch land's perfect. Now we can get a Shadow down. We've got a Ferocious Stubborn Denial. And it's found a Leyline Binding. I would like them to let us have a clock. Realistically, I should have let them resolve that. Like, looking back at it, I should have let them resolve that Leyline Binding, and then I binding their binding. because there's like no guarantee there's going to be a target for this binding ever. Um, so I should have just kept both of my counter spells that I know counter both of the spells they have in their hand and just binding their binding. But I kept thinking like, oh, I want an answer to a Dryad. They can't just like scape shift me out of nowhere. So they're 2 lands off of scape shift being lethal. Tarmogoyf is a really good pickup. That cuts my clock down. We find a prismatic ending. We find a Kavu. So kind of same situation again. Now they find the Dryad, and we find the Leyline Binding. But if we had binding their binding, we would have been in this same situation, except now I'd have a Stubborn Denial still in hand. I'm attacking into the Dryad with my 2 creatures. They have to chump block, but I've got the hard negate for the next thing that they try to play. So either way, I don't think it's, oh my god, the world's ending because we went for Leyline Binding, or we didn't go for Leyline Binding. But I think I would have preferred to have played that line out. Okay, but either way, review the deck list. Things that I thought were good. I thought Kavu was good. Ragavan, obviously. I thought Dromoka's command was good. Leyline Binding was solid. Teferi was really good. Thoughtseize was really good for us. Stubborn Denial was okay. We boarded it out a lot, but when we had it in, it was very relevant. In the sideboard, Geist was okay. EE was excellent. Not much to say about the board for the most part. Like I said, it was before the league started. It was kind of a hodgepodge of card choices. Things I thought were not good. Mishra's Bauble was whatever. Like you could just cut all this, run the 20th land. The 3 other baubles could be something else. Battle Rage was whatever. Tarmogoyfs weren't that great. Heat was whatever. I'd say like any of these were probably flex spots that I would consider messing around with. Uh, One of the reasons I really want Tarmogoyf is the ability to have like that secondary threat with Shadow. I might try an Ashoba Brawler at some point. I think it's got trample, so maybe that's relevant here or there. The 3 toughness and dying to bolt just kind of has me worried. Um, but any of these spells I think were mediocre at best. Maybe like the 4th stub or something. Uh, the mana base needs an overhaul. Like the mana base was really awkward a lot of times. I don't think you want Zagoth Triumph if you're running like this aggressive shadow kind of build. Savai Triumph was good. Like Savai Triumph plus Breeding Pool lets you get mana for everything you could possibly want. But the Zagoth Triumph was really awkward, not producing like red, which is not producing red or white. So it doesn't help towards any of those, as well as like the Battle Rage and Holy Heat. Um, I'd probably try to find room for like a basic forest, which means maybe finding room for verdant catacombs as well, like cut delta for catacombs, find a basic forest, because at least with the basic forest, you'd also be able to cast like Kavu, Tarmogoyf through Blood Moon. Basic Plains is an option instead, but I don't think we're heavy enough on white to really want Basic Plains. In the sideboard, Fluster Storm's fine, Alpine Moon's fine, Collector Roof was probably just a a meme for the league. Uh, any of, I guess, really like any of these, I'm probably fine cutting for something else. But like I said a few times now, it was just a hodgepodge league, so don't think there was a lot of thought process into it. But either way, I'm going to try out the Shadow Zoo kind of shell a little bit more going forward. I think that Kavu was really good, and I kind of want to explore that card more, especially when I'm seeing less dress downs. But we still need like this third threat. We've got Shadow Kavu. Ragavan's like an okay value piece. It's not really a threat, but somewhere between like Shadow, Goyf, Kavu, Scourge. There's a reliable secondary and tertiary threat. But either way, I'll have the link to the Discord down below, the link to this deck list, the Twitch channel. So if you want to come check out a live stream and give some feedback or yell at me over my terrible card choices, feel free to do that. Otherwise, hope everybody has a fantastic rest of your day. Stay safe, enjoy some good food and company. Catch y'all back later. Adios for now.